Hello, welcome back to the Happy Heat Pump podcast. This is where Beanland of the Heat Pump Federation and I, Evan Davis, discuss all things heat pumps. We're very interested in the massive transition that is slowly creeping upon us to get away from gas boilers, heat pumps, the obvious alternative. But today we need to talk about flats, because it's okay if you've got a big house with garden and walls of your own where you can put a heat pump. What about if you're on 24th floor of a block of flats? Bean, what is meant to happen if I live in a block of flats? Can I have a heat pump?
The answer is yes, you can have a heat pump. And actually, many blocks of flats have already got heat pumps. But the privately owned flat, so a private leasehold flat in a stack of apartments, is the hard to treat. We talk about hard to treat buildings in our world. And that is the hard to treat building, because doing it on your own can be difficult. It's not impossible, but it can be difficult. And getting all of the individual leaseholders to want to do the same thing at the same time can be incredibly challenging.
Okay, so let's start with the easy one then. So the easy one is where you've got perhaps a new build with a developer or somebody who owns the building and basically tells everyone we're going to put heat pumps on the roof or something like that, and that is how everyone's going to be heated. And that must happen, right?
Absolutely. That's been happening for some time in London. The GLA adopted a very low carbon threshold for planning applications.
Greater London Authority.
Greater London Authority.
Yeah.
Some little while ago. And that meant that a number of blocks that were in planning that were originally intended to have gas CHP systems in the basement.
Combined heat and iron power.
They had to be redrafted because they couldn't get them through building regulations. And so they've now got centralized systems, most of which have got large commercial air source heat pumps on the roof.
Okay, so that works. Out of interest, this is a kind of collective solution for the building. So no one's going to have a gas boiler. Not going to be like that. Does everybody have their own individual control over heating and the bills? They get their own bill and their own heat?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In most instances,
you do that then.
In most instances, it's done with centralized distribution of heated water. And each individual apartment has a heat interface unit, an HIU.
Okay.
And those heat interface units are all metered, and they'll all be wired for metering and for sending the data, the usage data, back to a centralized point from which the billing derives.
But your billing probably wouldn't be the energy provider, or would it? It would be the kind of the block manager who's paying the electricity bill, and you're paying them for your share of that.
Absolutely right. And this is what caused a bit of a problem during the time when government was picking up part of your energy bills, because individual consumers were protected by the price cap, but centralized systems were not. And so, of course, the prices that people in that sort of situation were being obliged to pay were much, much higher, and it did cause a massive problem.
Okay. But that is a collective solution, and that does work. And you can put them on the roof. I mean, you design a building.
Yeah, you design the building to take the weight. But we've been putting plant on the roofs of buildings for a long time, normally just for cooling, of course. But the beauty now is that these heat pump systems are going in. They're reversible. They're providing both the heating and the cooling. Because in new build, cooling is frequently now the dominant service.
Yeah.
So you need more cooling per year than you need heating per year.
That is actually happening. And those buildings, they have a system, and they do use them for cooling. So you can basically have air conditioning. So it's like being in a hotel, actually. Although I find in hotels the heating system you fiddle with the controls. It never does anything.
Most hotels, of course, are now heated with heat pumps. You know, as you go into the lobby, the ceiling's lower in the lobby, and if you turn and look back at the front face, there's a grill on it, and behind the grill there'll be a fan coil unit, and that'll be doing all the heating and cooling.
And on those solutions, is it generally air source heat pump? Is it generally a fan? It's not a radiator in the flat.
No,
it'll be a fan system, a hot air system.
In apartments, it could be anything, whatever the developers choose. But in hotels, it's normally what's called a fan coil unit, which is which is not a radiator.
Okay, so that's the easiest, a new build, you just put them on the roof. Now, let's say we've got a block of, a smallish block built in the 1970s or 80s. So it's not new. No one was talking about heat pumps when it was built. But several people in the block, maybe they jointly own the freehold. So they've got a kind of a freehold company that is responsible for managing the building.
Yep.
And several people say, I need a new boiler in the next couple of years. What are we doing about this heat pump malarkey? What is, let's imagine it's a peaceful, well-run building. What is the option for sort of retrofitting heat pumps in a building like that?
So that is really the challenge, because your management company of your leaseholders with their share of freehold will need to get together and somehow agree on what the strategy for the building is going to be. And it may be that they end up with some centralized combined system, because if they've all got individual gas boilers, that becomes tricky. Or they may ultimately have to be self-movers. And the self-movers do have some options.
Well, let's stop on the self-move. I want to just, is it possible to take a building? We'll come to the self-movers, but is it possible if everybody agrees, or let's suppose 90% agree and the management company says that's enough of a vote, we're going to install a heat pump system. It is going to be offered to everyone who wants it, and you are all going to be paying for it anyway, so you might as well take it. That can happen, can it?
That can happen.
And where do you put the heat pumps?
Well, there's usually a riser of some sort going through the building that you can drive the new services through. And there are a number of ways of cutting the solution, all of which will feature heat pumps of some sort. So you could have the big air source plant on the roof and drive that through the building and put heat interface units in each individual apartment. You could put an array of boreholes in the car parking areas, for example, and drive the services up and put individual ground source heat pumps in the place of the boilers. And that's a very big solution in social housing at the moment, in stacks of social housing apartments.
Right, so we can remind people, ground source heat pumps where you have a probe into the ground to take the heat out of the ground. It can be very, very efficient if you can, if you've got space to find the ground or the...
Yeah, you don't need a lot of space because the boreholes themselves are only about 180 millimeters in diameter. So you need several of them. And in London, we're now going deep. Because we don't have space to put lots of them, we're going deep.
Ground.
Yeah, we're 300 meters is not an unusual drilling depth in central London.
So you can, if you've got space, you could do ground source, but you could have a shared heat pump system. It is possible to do. Right, the third array. So we've got the new build collective arrangement. We've got the agreed retrofitted collective arrangement. The third and most interesting is, I want a heat pump. No one else in my building wants a heat pump. I'm replacing my gas boiler. Can I have a heat pump in my flat?
So there are a number of options. We now have companies coming forwards with balcony versions of air source heat pumps. So they're specifically built so the direction of the air intake and the exhaust are at 90 degrees to each other. So instead of being through and through, which is, where it comes in at the back and out at the front, which can be a challenge, you can take the air in longitudinally along the balcony, and then the cold exhaust is pointed away from the building. Those are beginning to come to the market in the UK.
So that would be your own heat pump for your own flat, and you're going to lose half your balcony if you put it in.
You're going to lose a small proportion of your balcony, but they're not massive machines because most apartments are quite small.
Show me how big these are. There's like this big or this big or...
They're smaller, that have probably a similar footprint to a domestic air source heat pump, but a bit taller. And the load on most apartments is relatively small because they tend to be smaller dwellings. So the actual size of the heat pump, the capacity...
You're sharing everyone else's gas boiler heat anyway because it's...
Exactly, unless you're on the top floor or the ground floor, you've got heat coming from all sides pretty well. So it's frequently manageable, and we're beginning to see those solutions coming, predominantly from European manufacturers, because, of course, there are a lot of apartments in Europe which have adopted heat pumps rather sooner than we have.
Okay, this is really interesting. Is there a kind of... portable heat pump option. There are portable air conditioners, and as you have explained before, air conditioners are heat pumps. Yeah. In reverse. And so, is there something you can just buy and?
Yeah, most of those units are reversible. Most of the portable units are reversible, so you could use them for heating. Problem is, you've got to get rid of the condensate. So there's a fluid condensate. You've got to be able to pipe that to outside somehow, and of course you've got to get the air into it. There are also solutions where you have units that effectively hang on a windowsill. Or are built in under a window, so you've got the air intake on the outside. So there's a number of technologies coming through, some of which look more likely to succeed than others. But I think the key here is there are options. And of course, in the modern era, with time of use tariffs for electricity pricing and reduction in prices of electricity storage, so batteries becoming more affordable, you could potentially say, well, actually, I'm going to decarbonize my flat. I can't put a heat pump in it for whatever reason, but I'm going to make use of time of use tariffs, charge some batteries, and run an electric boiler. That actually is a viable option.
Okay, so just don't bother with the heat pump. So just get an electric boiler. It uses about 3 times more electricity. But
you're buying your electricity well.
If you buy it in the night and then pump it out in the day.
There are,
and you can get heat batteries. You can get they're better than the old storage heaters.
Absolutely,
much better than the old storage heaters.
Decarbonisation for us, yes, it's really predominantly about heat pumps, but actually it's about stopping burning.
No, it's about electricity, because you can make electricity non-fossil fuel. Okay, so actually that may end up being the solution for a lot of flats.
It could be.
Don't bother with the hint. We're calling it the Happy Heat Pump podcast, and now you're telling me we don't.
No, we've got to be a bit broad-minded, Evan. Yeah, we've got to fit the technology in the right place.
Are flats basically going to be the last part of the home residential market that are going to basically go to electric? Because gas boilers do work well in flats.
Some flats will be last movers, probably, because some of these blocks will be relying ultimately on having heat networks going past the door. Because that's the other option, of course.
Right. Okay, I had written that down, actually, and I was hoping we could have. What is a heat network? What is it?
Well, a heat network is just a large district heating scheme, and we've had them in this country for...
Where? Give an example. What is a heat network?
Okay, so an example from the past would be the waste heat from Battersea Power Station that was piped under the river and used to heat the apartments on the north side of the river, the social housing. And that was happening for decades, and that goes back a long, long time. We've got examples now going in all around London, some which were driven by gas or by gas combined heat and power are now being converted to heat pumps. So we have a retrofitting industry going on in that respect. And then you've got the new ones being talked about. The most high profile is probably the new SWAN scheme, which is the South Westminster Area Network, I think it stands for, which includes the whole of the parliamentary estate pretty well.
Okay.
And that will almost certainly be driven by the River Thames.
So that is way above the individual pay grade of any dweller. That is basically a community, a town is going to, or a council is going to say, we're going to offer this.
It's infrastructural scale investment for future, and it gives you access to some of the big sources of energy, like waste heat from the tube stations, for example, which we're already making use of, making use of the River Thames. Boris Johnson came back and said, the French are heating and cooling Paris on the Seine. Why aren't we doing the same? Well, we'd love to, but getting consensus has been a problem to date. That is all changing.
But that is a solution for denser living in flats, and it takes a bit of organization. So let's just summarize. You've got the community solution, the network, which other countries and even we're doing sometimes. You've got the developer just installing heat pumps in a newish building. You've got the building agreeing to heat pumps as their solution and then installing them at their expense. You've got individuals putting in balcony heat pumps or electric boiler inside and finessing the use of it. So you've got quite a range of things. So it will not be impossible to get gas out.
Not at all.
Flats. And there are countries that are already doing it, obviously, where they're not using gas boilers.
There's the solution for every apartment style building. We just have to find the sweet spot for that particular application and that occupancy.
Yeah. I mean, my slight worry is that just getting agreement among people, and if you've got 5 people in a block of flats, let alone 50, 500 people in a block, getting them all to agree can be an absolutely enormous problem. But that's why sometimes individual solutions will be more appealing. But
we've seen examples of exactly that. I looked at a block of apartments in what was a listed building that had been built as a spa. And there, the challenge was that some of the apartments couldn't replace their gas boilers because of changes to the regulations around where the flues were. So they had their boiler needed replacing. They were no longer allowed to put the boiler and have the flue where they could readily access it. And so they had to decarbonize. They had to take an electric solution. That started to put pressure on the electricity supply for the building long before others needed to replace their gas boilers. So there are individual problems that will come through. We just have to be agile in the way we think about these things.
All right. I think that's enough for today. Bean, thank you for that. Maybe you've got thoughts on flats. Maybe you've got questions about heat pumps. Do let us have them. The happyheatpumppod@gmail.com. That's our email address. Leave comments, questions, reviews, whatever you like. And we'll be back with another Happy Heat Pump podcast very soon.